The bride refused to let the nanny sit inside, so the groom turned to the priest and said, "Stop. Welcome to Tales by Orion. Let's uncover what really happened. Have you ever been to a wedding? A place of grand pronouncements, of public promises, a spectacle of joy and union. But what happens when the spectacle is just a mask? What happens when the whitest dress hides the darkest heart? We live in a society that loves a good show. We applaud the loud, the beautiful, the wealthy, and in doing so, we often fail to see the quiet strength, the silent integrity of those who stand in the shadows. Today's story is about one such wedding. It's about a bride named Anastasia, a groom named Michael, and a nanny named Clara, who was told she didn't belong. It's a story about a line being drawn, a choice being made, and a man at an altar, who with two simple words, stopped a ceremony to start a revolution. This isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's a story about what family truly means, and how the person you underestimate the most might just be the one holding your entire world together. The world of Michael Sterling was one of quiet legacy and immense, unspoken pressure. His family's name was etched onto university buildings and museum wings, a dynasty built on old-world industry and shrewd modern investments. Their home was a sprawling stone manor in the greenest part of the state, a place of manicured lawns and hushed corridors where history was a palpable presence. But for Michael, this legacy was less a cushion and more a cage. His parents' tragic death in a car accident 5 years earlier had thrust him, at the age of 25, into the role of patriarch. He was now the head of the family empire, and more importantly, the sole guardian of his 10-year-old sister, Lily. Lily was the bright, vibrant heart of his world, and the silent, steady anchor that kept them both from drifting away was a woman named Clara. To the outside world, Clara was simply the nanny, a woman in her late 40s, with a face that was pleasant but unremarkable, and a wardrobe of simple, practical clothes that made her fade into the background. She was quiet, almost preternaturally so. Her movements were economical and precise, whether she was pouring a glass of milk or calmly disarming one of Lily's rare tantrums. Her eyes, a clear, steady gray, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a watcher, an observer who processed the world with a deep, unsettling stillness. She was the calm in the storm of their grief, the routine that gave their fractured lives a new structure. Into this fragile peace marched Anastasia Dubois. Anastasia was, by all accounts, the perfect match for a man of Michael's stature. She was stunningly beautiful, came from a family whose new money was aggressively ambitious, and she moved through their social circles with the predatory grace of a panther. She saw Michael not just as a man to love, but as an acquisition, the final jewel in the crown of her social ascension. From the moment she set foot in the Sterling manor, her gaze fell upon Clara with an immediate, instinctual disdain. Anastasia saw the world in a rigid hierarchy, and in her eyes, Clara was merely a uniformed subordinate, a piece of furniture that happened to be able to talk. She would speak to her without making eye contact, issue thinly veiled orders disguised as polite requests, and refer to her in the third person while Clara was standing right there. "Michael, darling," she'd say, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Do you think the help could take Lily upstairs? The adults need to talk." Clara never reacted. She would simply nod, take Lily's hand, and retreat, her face a placid mask that betrayed nothing of the careful analysis going on behind her eyes. She had seen women like Anastasia before, in boardrooms and in war zones. She knew the particular brand of insecurity that masqueraded as arrogance. She knew how to wait, because Clara wasn't just a nanny. That was a role, a purpose she had chosen for reasons that were buried deep in a past Michael only vaguely understood. He knew she had worked for his father in a security consulting capacity, a title that seemed far too mundane for the quiet competence she radiated. He knew she had been there, on that terrible night of the accident. He just didn't know the whole story. And Anastasia, in her blind arrogance, was about to force it into the light. The announcement of the engagement was the starting pistol for Anastasia's campaign to remake the Sterling household in her own image. Her first priority was to establish her dominance, and her primary target was Clara. The wedding, a grand affair planned for 6 months' time at the historic St. Jude's Cathedral, became her battlefield. The inciting incident occurred during a meeting with the high-end wedding planner, a woman as polished and intimidating as Anastasia herself. They were in the manor's grand library, surrounded by leather-bound books that held more history than Anastasia's entire family tree. Clara had just brought in a tray of tea, her movements silent and efficient, As she was about to leave, Anastasia called her back. "Clara, a moment," she said. The words sharp and cold. Clara turned, her expression neutral. Anastasia gestured vaguely towards the intricate seating charts and floral samples spread across the mahogany table. "We're discussing the wedding logistics," she said, as if explaining a complex scientific concept to a child. "And I want to be perfectly clear about your role on the day." Michael, who had been on a business call in the corner of the room, had just hung up and was walking over. He smiled at Clara, a warmth in his eyes that Anastasia noted with a flicker of irritation. "Of course Clara will be there," Michael said easily. "She'll have to look after Lily. We'll find a nice seat for them both." Anastasia's smile was razor thin. "That's what I wanted to clarify, darling," she said, turning her full attention to Clara, her eyes like chips of ice. "Clara, you will be there as staff. You will be responsible for Lily until the reception begins. During the ceremony itself, you are not to be seated in the cathedral. It's for family and guests. There is a small private garden attached to the rectory. You and Lily can wait there. It's quite pleasant, I'm told." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The wedding planner looked down at her notes, suddenly fascinated by her own handwriting. Michael frowned, a line of confusion creasing his forehead. "Anastasia, don't be ridiculous," he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. "Clara is family. She can sit with Lily in the back. No one will care." "I care," Anastasia snapped, her polite facade cracking for a moment to reveal the steel beneath. She quickly composed herself, forcing another brittle smile. "Michael, it's about appearances. It's about maintaining a certain decorum. We can't have the nanny sitting amongst our guests. It's just not done." She looked at Clara, expecting her to be flustered, to argue, to show some sort of weakness. But Clara simply stood there, her gaze steady. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. "I understand," she said, her voice a quiet murmur. "Whatever you and Michael decide is fine." And with that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a baffled Michael and a triumphant Anastasia. Anastasia believed she had won. She had asserted her authority and put the servant in her place. She had no way of knowing that she hadn't just insulted a nanny. She had just put a trained operative on high alert. Clara's quiet acquiescence was not surrender. It was a tactical retreat. The threat was no longer potential. It was active, and she would now begin her preparations accordingly. The war for the Sterling family had officially been declared. In the months leading up to the wedding, Anastasia's campaign of petty tyranny against Clara escalated, amplified by her coterie of bridesmaids. They were a flock of shrill, wealthy young women who mirrored Anastasia's cruelty and saw Clara as a target for their casual malice. They would descend upon the manor for dress fittings and planning sessions, their laughter echoing unnaturally in the quiet halls. They treated Clara with a blend of condescension and outright mockery, making snide remarks about her simple attire just loud enough for her to hear. "Can you imagine wearing polyester? I think my maid has better taste," one of them would whisper, followed by a ripple of cruel giggles. They would accidentally leave their expensive handbags in precarious positions, only to gasp with dramatic relief when Clara moved them to safety, as if they had just narrowly avoided a theft. Clara absorbed it all with the stoic endurance of a stone cliff against a relentless tide. Her focus remained laser-sharp on her primary mission, the well-being of Lily. The young girl was becoming increasingly anxious and withdrawn in Anastasia's presence. She sensed the coldness, the dismissive way Anastasia treated the woman who was her rock. Lily would cling to Clara's hand, her small face clouded with a confusion she couldn't articulate. Clara, in turn, became an even more profound source of stability for the child. Her quiet presence was a shield. She would redirect Anastasia's barbs not by confrontation, but by calmly leading Lily away for a walk in the gardens or to work on a puzzle in the library. "Their words are just noise, little bird," Clara would tell Lily softly, using her pet name for the girl. "Like the wind in the trees. You hear it, but you don't have to let it knock you over." While she presented a placid exterior, Clara's mind was working with a quiet, methodical intensity. Her old training, long dormant, began to reassert itself. When she walked through the rooms of the manor, she wasn't just tidying up, she was mapping sightlines and choke points. When she took Lily for a drive, she was subconsciously running anti-surveillance routes. And as the wedding day approached, she began her own, silent preparations. She confirmed the layout of the cathedral and the reception venue, not from the guest's perspective, but from a security standpoint. She noted all exits, the positions of the security cameras, and the proximity of the nearest emergency services. She packed a small discreet bag for the wedding day, It contained everything Lily might need: a change of clothes, a favorite book, some snacks, but hidden in discreet compartments were other items: a compact but comprehensive first aid kit, a high-lumen tactical flashlight, a multi-tool, and a small, powerful personal alarm. She was not anticipating a disaster, but her life had taught her that disaster rarely sends an invitation. It was a habit, etched into her very soul. Be prepared. One afternoon, as the wedding drew closer, she was in her small, neat room, polishing a pair of simple black leather shoes, her one concession to formal wear for the wedding. Her gaze fell upon a small, locked wooden box on her nightstand. She rarely opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single heavy medal and a small framed photograph. The photo was of a younger Clara, her face unsmiling, dressed in severe black fatigues, standing beside Michael's father. They were in a desert landscape, the sun beating down. The medal was for distinguished service, awarded for an act of bravery she had sworn to forget. She looked at the photo, at the man who had trusted her with his life, and the lives of his family. She had failed him once. She would not fail him again. She closed the box, the quiet click echoing in the silent room. Her resolve was absolute. Anastasia could play her games of social warfare. Clara was playing for far higher stakes. Anastasia's animosity was not content with mere insults. It soon morphed into active sabotage. She became obsessed with the idea of removing Clara from the equation entirely before the wedding. She saw Clara's quiet dignity not as a sign of strength, but as a silent judgment, and she could not bear it. Her plan was as cruel as it was calculated. Anastasia owned a pair of diamond earrings, a pre-wedding gift from Michael's aunt, valued at over $50,000. One afternoon, after a particularly tense brunch where Lily had refused to even speak to her, Anastasia put her plan into motion. She went upstairs to her suite, took the earrings from their velvet box, and carefully tucked them into a pocket of one of Clara's coats hanging in the staff closet near the kitchen. Later that evening, she let out a theatrical shriek. She stormed into the living room where Michael was reading, her face a mask of manufactured panic and distress. "My earrings, the diamond earrings from your Aunt Carol, they're gone." A frantic, performative search ensued. Anastasia led Michael and 2 household staff members on a wild goose chase through her suite, all the while dropping poisonous hints. "I don't understand. I was so careful with them," she lamented. "The only person who was up there today besides me was, well, Clara was, to bring Lily's laundry." Michael's face tightened. "Anastasia, don't even think it. Clara is beyond reproach." "I'm not thinking anything, darling," she insisted, her eyes wide with false innocence. "I'm just so upset. They have such sentimental value." But her trap was already sprung. She reluctantly agreed to a search of the common areas. It was she who suggested the staff closet, and it was she, with a gasp of feigned shock, who reached into Clara's coat and pulled out the glittering earrings. "Oh my God," she breathed, looking at Michael, her eyes filling with crocodile tears. "I don't believe it." The 2 staff members stared, their faces a mixture of shock and suspicion. Michael looked at the earrings in Anastasia's hand, then at Clara, who had been summoned and was now standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. He felt a surge of cold fury, but it was not directed at Clara. It was directed at the transparent, ugly theatricality of the scene before him. He knew Clara. He knew her integrity was as solid and unyielding as granite. He walked over and took the earrings from Anastasia's hand. He looked at them, then back at his fiancée, his eyes boring into hers. "How fortunate," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "that you knew exactly which pocket to check." Anastasia paled, realizing she had overplayed her hand. I didn't know." "Stop," Michael said, the single word cutting her off. He turned to Clara. "I am so sorry you were subjected to this, Clara. Please, excuse us." Clara simply inclined her head and left, her composure unshaken. The accusation had been a pathetic, amateurish attempt, and she had seen through it from the moment it began. Later that night, Michael confronted Anastasia. She broke down, admitting she had planted them, but framed it as a desperate act born of stress and a feeling of being an outsider, because of Clara's special relationship with him and Lily. Michael, blinded by a sense of duty to his engagement and a misplaced desire to believe the best of her, accepted the apology. But a deep, irreparable crack had formed in the foundation of their relationship. He had seen a glimpse of the real Anastasia, the one who lived behind the beautiful mask, and it was a chilling sight. For Clara, the incident changed nothing and everything. It confirmed the depth of her adversary's malice and the lengths she would go to. The wedding was no longer just an event to be endured. It was a strategic objective, a final confrontation for which she needed to be perfectly prepared. The day of the wedding dawned bright and painfully clear, the kind of perfect blue sky day that mocks a heart in turmoil. The Sterling Manor was a hive of frantic, controlled chaos. Florists, caterers, and photographers swarmed through the house, their nervous energy a stark contrast to the grim tension that had settled over the family. Michael moved through the preparations like a ghost, his handsome face set in a tight, joyless mask. His earlier confrontation with Anastasia had left a bitter taste in his mouth, a sense of deep foreboding he couldn't shake. Anastasia, on the other hand, was in her element. She was the queen of this spectacle, radiant in a white gown that had cost more than a luxury car, her every movement followed by the adoring lens of the wedding photographer. She was triumphant, her victory seemingly at hand. Clara had dressed Lily in a beautiful pale yellow dress, brushing her hair until it shone like spun gold. Lily was quiet, her usual ebullience snuffed out. "Do I have to go, Clara?" she whispered, her big eyes pleading. "Of course, little bird," Clara said, her voice a low soothing balm. "You are the groom's sister. You have a very important job to do. You have to be brave for him. But will you be there?" "I will never be far away," Clara promised, and it was a vow she intended to keep. They arrived at the cathedral, a magnificent Gothic structure of soaring stone arches and stained glass windows. Guests in their finery were already filling the pews, their polite chatter echoing in the cavernous space. Clara, holding Lily's hand, made her way towards the back, intending to find a discreet seat where they could watch without being obtrusive. That was when Anastasia, flanked by her two chief bridesmaids, intercepted them. She stood before them like a vengeful angel, her white dress a stark contrast to the venom in her eyes. "And where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice low and sharp, ensuring only those nearby could hear the exchange. "I thought I made my instructions perfectly clear." Clara met her gaze. "Lily wanted to see Michael before the ceremony begins." "No," Anastasia said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This is my day, my wedding. You will not ruin it by parading the help through my guests. I told you, there is a tent for you. Outside. In the garden. That is where staff waits." She looked down at Lily, whose lower lip had begun to tremble. "Be a good girl, Lily, and go with your nanny." She then turned to Clara, her voice laced with finality. "This is the last time I will tell you, know your place." This was it, the final, public humiliation. It wasn't just a command. It was a branding, an attempt to permanently mark Clara as an inferior being in front of everyone. Several guests in the nearby pews had turned to watch, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Clara looked at Anastasia's triumphant face, then at the tears welling in Lily's eyes. She felt a cold, slow-burning anger, an emotion she had not allowed herself to feel in years. But her training held. Emotion was a liability. She would not give Anastasia the satisfaction of a reaction. She gave a curt, professional nod. "Understood." She squeezed Lily's hand gently. "Come, little bird. Let's go outside for some air." She turned and began to lead the now sobbing child away from the splendor of the cathedral, towards the small, isolated tent in the garden, a symbol of her designated exile. She was a soldier following an unjust order, her mind already calculating the fallout and planning the next move. She did not know that the general himself was about to intervene. Michael stood at the altar beside his best man, the gilded cross and the solemn face of the priest before him a blur. His heart hammered in his chest, a frantic drumbeat of dread. He scanned the assembled guests, the sea of smiling, expectant faces. He was looking for two people. He finally spotted them near the main entrance. Clara, her posture ramrod straight, and Lily, small and fragile beside her. He saw the brief tense confrontation with Anastasia. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. He saw it all in Anastasia's smug, triumphant expression as she turned away. He saw it in the way Clara's shoulders seemed to tense for a fraction of a second. And most of all, he saw it in the way his little sister's face crumpled, her small body shaking with silent sobs as Clara led her away, not into a pew but out of the cathedral entirely. In that single sickening moment, everything became crystal clear. It wasn't bride stress. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. It was a deliberate, systematic campaign of cruelty, waged against a woman who was part of the very fabric of his family, and against a child he had sworn to protect. The fake earring incident, the constant snide remarks he had tried to ignore, the coldness towards Lily, it all coalesced into a single ugly truth. The woman he was about to marry was a bully, a cruel, status-obsessed stranger, who was fundamentally devoid of the kindness and empathy he valued most. He looked at Anastasia as she began her procession down the aisle, a vision in white, beaming at the guests, a perfect portrait of a blushing bride. But all Michael could see was the ugliness he now knew she hid beneath the surface. He felt a wave of self-loathing wash over him. How had he been so blind? How had he let his sense of obligation, his desire for a normal family, deafen him to what was happening in his own home? He thought of his parents. He thought of his father, who had respected Clara above all others. He thought of his mother, who would have moved heaven and earth to protect her children from a woman like Anastasia. The music swelled. Anastasia reached the altar, her hand slipping into his. It felt cold, alien. She smiled at him, a radiant, possessive smile. The priest cleared his throat, his warm voice filling the hushed cathedral. "Dearly beloved," he began, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God, to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." Michael's mind was racing. He could go through with it. He could swallow this poison, condemn his sister to a life with a stepmother who despised her, and betray the trust of the woman who had saved his life. He could choose the spectacle over the substance, or he could do the right thing, the hardest thing. He felt Clara's promise to Lily echoing in his mind. "I will never be far away," and he knew he had to make a promise of his own. Anastasia leaned in, whispering, "Isn't it perfect?" He looked into her beautiful, empty eyes, and he made his choice. He gently pulled his hand from hers. He held up his other hand, a clear, unmistakable gesture. He turned to the priest, whose words had faltered at the interruption. Michael's voice, when he spoke, was not loud, but it carried an astonishing weight of authority that cut through the silence of the vast cathedral. "Stop," he said. The single word echoed off the stone vaults of the cathedral, and then fell into a pit of absolute, shocked silence. The organist's fingers froze over the keys. The priest's mouth hung slightly agape. Every single guest, from the front pew to the back, was bolt upright, their eyes wide with disbelief. Anastasia stared at Michael, her perfect smile frozen on her face, slowly crumbling into a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "Michael?" she whispered, her voice a brittle thing. "What are you doing?" Michael ignored her. He turned away from the altar, away from his beautiful, toxic bride, and began to walk down the aisle, his steps deliberate and sure. He walked past the stunned faces of his family and friends, past the rows of socialites and business partners. His destination was the massive oak doors at the back of the cathedral. He pushed them open, flooding the vestibule with sunlight, and stepped outside. There, in the manicured church garden, was the scene that had broken his heart. A small, sad-looking white tent had been erected on the grass, and inside it, sitting on a hard folding chair, was Clara, her arm wrapped around a still sniffling Lily. She looked up as he approached, her face betraying a flicker of surprise for the first time. Michael knelt, bringing himself down to eye level with his sister. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with a pain and love so profound it was almost a physical thing. "There is no reason for you to cry. Not anymore. I made a mistake, and I'm going to fix it. Right now." He gently wiped a tear from her cheek. He then stood and turned to Clara. He looked at this quiet, stoic woman who had endured so much for his family, for him. The fragmented memories, the stories his father had told, the truth he had known but never fully processed, now demanded to be spoken. "Clara," he said, his voice filled with a decade's worth of unspoken gratitude. "I'm sorry. I've been a blind fool." He took her hand and helped her to her feet. Then, with Lily holding his other hand, he led them back into the cathedral. The sight of the groom, hand in hand with his sister and the nanny, walking back up the aisle, sent a fresh wave of gasps through the crowd. Anastasia watched them approach, her face now a canvas of pure fury. "Michael, what is the meaning of this?" she hissed as he reached the front. "Have you lost your mind?" Michael finally looked at her, and his gaze was devoid of any warmth, any affection. It was the gaze of a judge. He let go of Clara and Lily's hands and stood before the entire congregation, a man transformed. "No, Anastasia," he said, his voice clear and strong, reaching every corner of the church. "For the first time in a very long time, I am seeing things perfectly." He took a deep breath and began to speak. "Not to her but to everyone. I owe you all an apology for bringing you here today under false pretenses. This wedding cannot happen. Because I have allowed myself to forget what the word family truly means." He turned and gestured to Clara, who stood with quiet dignity, her hand resting protectively on Lily's shoulder. "Most of you know this woman as Clara, Lily's nanny. You see her as staff, as the help. That is how my fiancé sees her." The word fiancé was laced with ice. "But you are all mistaken, and I have been complicit in that mistake by my silence." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "This woman's name is Clara Jensen. 15 years ago, my father hired her not as a nanny, but as the head of his corporate and personal security detail. She is a former Special Forces operative with a distinguished service record. For 10 years, she protected our family from threats you cannot even imagine." The murmurs in the crowd grew into a low roar of astonishment. "5 years ago," Michael continued, his voice cracking with emotion, "Clara was in the car with my parents on the night of the accident. It was not her fault. A drunk driver crossed the median. My parents were killed instantly. The car was a wreck of twisted metal and fire." He pointed to a faint scar above his own eyebrow. "I was in that car. I was trapped. And the last thing I remember before I lost consciousness was Clara, bleeding and injured herself, pulling me from that wreckage just seconds before it was engulfed in flames. She saved my life." He looked at Clara, his eyes filled with tears. "And as I was being put into the ambulance, she made a promise to my dying mother. She promised she would watch over Lily, always. She gave up her career, her old life, everything, to honor that promise. She stayed with us, not as an employee, but as a guardian, a protector, a promise keeper." He finally turned his gaze back to a stone-faced Anastasia. "This woman is not staff. She is not the help. She is the reason I am alive. She is the reason my sister is safe. She is the bedrock of our family. And any person who would treat her with cruelty, disrespect and contempt, who would banish her to a tent while they celebrate, is not a person I can call my wife. That person has no place in my family, and no place in my life." The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a truth so powerful, it had shattered a world of lies. The immediate aftermath was a tableau of frozen shock and shattered spectacle. Anastasia stood at the altar, her beautiful face a grotesque mask of disbelief and incandescent rage. The perfect day, the perfect wedding, her perfect triumph, all reduced to ashes by a truth she had been too arrogant to even consider. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Michael's grandfather, a stern, formidable man who rarely showed emotion, rose from the front pew. He walked to Clara, took her hand, and bowed his head slightly. "Miss Jensen," he said, his voice gruff but thick with respect. "On behalf of our entire family, thank you, and forgive us for our blindness." That single act broke the spell. One by one, Michael's relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, who had treated Clara with polite indifference for years, rose and came forward. They offered apologies, handshakes, tearful embraces. They looked at her now, not as the nanny, but as a hero, a quiet legend who had been living among them all along. The mocking chorus of bridesmaids, who had been clustered around Anastasia, seemed to vaporize. They slipped away down a side aisle, their faces flushed with a mixture of horror and profound social humiliation, desperate to distance themselves from the catastrophic fallout. Anastasia, finally snapping out of her stupor, turned on Michael. "You will regret this," she spat, her voice a venomous hiss. "You have humiliated me. You have humiliated my family." "No, Anastasia," Michael said, his voice weary but firm. "You have humiliated yourself. Your cruelty did this, nothing else. Now I suggest you and your family leave." Her father, a portly man with a perpetually red face, hurried up the aisle and ushered his daughter away, her sobs of fury echoing in the now buzzing cathedral. The wedding was over. But for the Sterling family, something far more important had just begun. Michael led Clara and a now beaming Lily out of the cathedral, not through a side door, but right back down the main aisle, past the rows of their remaining guests. It was not a walk of shame, but a procession of honor. They stepped out into the bright sunshine, leaving the wreckage of the wedding behind them. The small, insulting white tent still stood on the lawn, a pathetic monument to Anastasia's vanquished cruelty. Michael glanced at it, then at Clara. "I'll have that burned," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips for the first time that day. Clara's reply was simple, her voice as calm as ever. "That won't be necessary, Michael. It's just a thing. It has no power anymore." And she was right. The power had shifted. The truth was out. The quiet 25-year war that began in the Sterling household was over. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been proclaimed from the altar of a cathedral. In the days that followed the cancelled wedding, the story ripped through their elite social circles like a wildfire. It was a scandal of epic proportions. But the narrative was not what Anastasia might have hoped. She had tried to paint Michael as unstable, a jilted groom who had a breakdown at the altar. But the truth, as told by the dozens of credible witnesses in the cathedral, was far more compelling. Michael was not the villain of the story. He was a hero, a man of integrity who had chosen family and honor over a beautiful but hollow bride. Anastasia and her family became social pariahs overnight, their names synonymous with cruelty and spectacular public disgrace. The Dubois family, who had seen the marriage as their ticket to the highest echelons of society, found themselves uninvited from parties and dropped from charity boards. Their humiliation was as public as their ambition had been. Back at the Sterling Manor, a quiet, profound healing was taking place. The oppressive atmosphere of Anastasia's reign was gone, replaced by a sense of peace and rightness. Michael's primary focus was on making things right. He sat down with Clara in the library, the same room where she had been so casually dismissed months before. It was a conversation that was long overdue. "Clara," he began, "I don't even know where to start. I'm sorry feels so small for what I let happen, for what I failed to see." "You saw it when it mattered, Michael," she replied, her gaze direct but gentle. "That is what counts." "It's not enough," he insisted. "I've been going through my father's old papers. I found your original contract, the security reports. I read the full, unredacted file on the accident." His voice grew thick. "I never knew the details. That you shielded me with your own body. That you refused medical attention until Lily's safety was confirmed. You've been carrying this, all of it, in silence, while I was preparing to marry a woman who wanted you to sit in a tent." He stood up and began to pace, agitated. "I can't change what happened, but I can change the future. Your role in this house, Nanny, is an insult. I want you to stay, Clara, officially, as Lily's legal guardian, alongside me, as a member of the Sterling Family Trust Board. I need your counsel, your wisdom, not just for Lily, but for the business, for everything. I want you to take your rightful place in this family. No more shadows, no more service entrances." Clara listened, her hands folded in her lap. For years, she had lived by a strict code of service and quiet duty, a self-imposed penance for a past she couldn't change. She had sought a quiet life, a hidden life. But Michael was offering her something else. Not a return to her old life, but an integration of it, a chance to be both the protector and the family member, the strategist and the guardian, a chance to finally be whole. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "I think," she said softly, "your father would have liked that." A year later, the Sterling Manor was a different place. The hushed, museum-like quality was gone, replaced by warmth and life. Laughter was once again a common sound in its halls. The new reality was a testament to the changes Michael had implemented, with Clara as his most trusted advisor. They were a family, a true and solid unit of three. Clara had accepted Michael's offer. She was now a legal co-guardian for Lily and a non-executive director on the board of Sterling Industries, overseeing all corporate security and risk assessment. Her sharp strategic mind, once dedicated to covert operations, was now focused on protecting the family's legacy. She had an office next to Michael's, but she rarely used it, preferring the library. She moved through the world with the same quiet grace, but the deference was gone, replaced by an air of calm, unquestioned authority. Michael had blossomed into the leader his father always knew he could be. Freed from the toxic influence of Anastasia and guided by Clara's steady wisdom, he led his company with a renewed sense of integrity and purpose. But his real joy was his family. He was a constant, loving presence in Lily's life, no longer a distracted guardian, but a devoted brother. Lily herself was thriving. With the constant loving presence of both her brother and Clara, she had shed her anxiety and blossomed into a confident, happy young girl. The final scene is not a grand event, but a small, perfect moment of peace. It's a sunny Saturday afternoon. Michael, Clara, and Lily are in the vast gardens behind the manor. Not for a party, but for a simple picnic on the grass. Michael is laughing, trying to teach Lily how to fly a kite. Clara is sitting on a blanket, watching them, a book resting unread in her lap. Her face, which so many had once dismissed as plain, is now seen by all who know her as a portrait of strength, wisdom, and profound peace. Michael glances over at her, and their eyes meet across the lawn. He gives her a smile, a look of such deep gratitude and affection that no words are needed. This is family, not a thing of contracts or social standing, but a bond forged in loyalty, tested in fire, and built on a foundation of truth. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. The world will try to put you in a box, to label you, to judge you by your cover. It will tell you to know your place. But true worth isn't determined by the seat you're assigned at a party. It's determined by your character, your integrity, and the quiet courage you show when no one is watching. The person you overlook, the one you dismiss, might just be the pillar holding up your entire world. Have you ever seen someone so profoundly misjudged? Tell us your story in the comments. We believe these stories of quiet strength need to be shared. Thank you for listening.